Hi, welcome to another episode of Arbitral Voices, an ITA videocast series. Today, we're sitting here with Marc Michael. Hi, Marc.
Hi, Roy.
How's it going?
It's going well. How about yourself?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Marc is Vice President and Chief Counsel of Global Dispute Resolution at AES Corporation. The AES Corporation is a powerhouse of the power sector, if you'll excuse my pun. It's a Fortune 500 company with generation and distribution companies in 15 countries. They deliver power to end users and intermediaries. They employ over 10,000 people worldwide and are headquartered in Arlington, Virginia. Marc manages a broad range of disputes in the U.S. abroad. He's tackled multiple investment treaty claims against sovereign states, cross-border construction disputes, governance and securities lawsuits, antitrust matters, U.S. and foreign investigations, and regulatory proceedings. He's been at AES for almost 20 years. And before then, he was a litigation associate at Winston & Strawn. How's it going, Marc?
Going well. Thank you very much.
So, 20 years at ES.
It's scary.
What's kept you there?
It's gone by in a blank, very, very fast. It really is a different type of company. I know that sounds cliche, but it's very true. We're very proud of the company. It's always had a history of doing things a little bit differently. It started its history being a mission-based company trying to bring generation facilities that were at Western standards, that were safe, that were reliable in developing markets so that we could improve lives. That was the mission of the founders. And that spirit has kind of kept with us ever since. We've had a lot of firsts. We did the world's first carbon offset project ever in the late 80s. We did the world's first solar plus storage project, the world's first utility scale battery project. We're the number one supplier of renewable power to data centers. So I could go on and on. There are a lot of firsts, but we also have a very, very large geographic footprint. And because of that, the issues that we get into are complex. They're fascinating. It leads to a lot of cross-border disputes or international arbitrations, treaty arbitration. So it's a remarkably exciting company and a remarkably exciting job.
Yeah, so on that job, Chief Counsel of Global Dispute Resolution, that's a rare, special, pretty unique role.
Right.
What does that role entail? What does a company need, a head of disputes?
We try to keep the headquarters lane where I am in Arlington, Virginia, and we serve as a center of excellence, we call it, on sub-specializations that are high value, but maybe it's not efficient to replicate it. We have very capable people dealing with local issues in country that are complex, that are material, but maybe they haven't dealt with an international arbitration. Maybe they haven't dealt with a particular type of investigation or a treaty arbitration. That's where we come in. And we see those issues all the time, and they get the benefit of our learning when we come onto the team.
So you've been outside counsel. You started as outside counsel,
right? And
you've been inside counsel for 20 years. I assume now you prefer inside counsel 6 years there. What's been the biggest difference for you?
Oh, wow. The pace of work. It's you are going to be in a fast-paced environment. The type of disputes that you're going to be dealing with is going to be far beyond what you could have dealt with as external counsel. And you're going to have to be comfortable making decisions with incomplete information. And that means a heavy reliance on those fantastic external counsel that really we need to help us in doing whatever we might be doing, whether it's an M&A deal or a construction dispute or a treaty dispute. We rely heavily on our external counsel who are much deeper in knowledge. Their depth is far greater than ours when it comes to a particular matter.
Fantastic external counsel. What makes an external counsel fantastic?
So our general counsel, Paul Freeman, he tells us, the group, technical excellence is just the start. It's the baseline. It takes a lot of work to do that, to get there, but it's just the start. You need to go far beyond that if you want to become a trusted colleague, and that's true of our external counsel. So it's someone who's got great EIQ, obviously is smart commercially, knows the power sector for sure, someone who's going to work with us on staffing and budgets, absolutely, someone who's going to be relatable. That's not necessarily easy. I mean, we're a company all around the world. We've got people, obviously, with different backgrounds and viewpoints, But our external counsel have got to be adept at dealing with not just the person at the plant, let's say, or the country manager, but also the C-suite and everyone in between. So it's demanding, but we've developed a very, we think, good, capable roster of external counsel, and they've been very loyal to us as we've had our problems over the years in various matters.
So EIQ, there's no Chambers Award for EIQ. How do you evaluate that when choosing, external counsel?
So when I joined AES, as really there was a heavy focus when I was at Winston on federal litigation with some arbitration, some international arbitration. It wasn't something that we focused on as much as we focus internally at AES. It's something that takes time to develop, obviously, because you really need to get to know somebody. You need to understand the company. So when I first joined the company, it was hard. The ramp-up curve was very, very steep and overwhelming. Now it's much easier because I've been there so long. And to be honest with you, if you told me to put it on paper, I wouldn't be able to give you a metric that would be useful.
Fair. So you mentioned, we're talking about what makes a fantastic outside counsel. What, without naming names, do you wish outside counsel understood better?
Far and away budgets. So we used to be able to tell our colleagues in finance, look, litigation, arbitration is so inherently uncertain. There's no way we can possibly estimate with certainty the cost of a proceeding. And the retort is, well, we need to do it with multi-$100 million facilities that are more than $1 billion. So if we can do it there, you can do it here. And so what we ask our outside counsel to do is give us a fair and accurate estimate of the work. We ask them to keep to that. We're being tracked internally, monthly. We get various reports. It's green if it's good, it's red if it's bad. And we have obligations as a public company to make sure that we're hitting our metrics. We've told the street, look, we're going to have this for EPS, we're going to have that for revenues. Only so much cost is baked into all of that. So missing a budget, having a large variance, that reflects very poorly on the company. It reflects poorly on the legal group internally and also on external counsel. And I understand that they may not be accustomed to dealing with the issue as much as we are. Maybe they are. Maybe other clients are like us. But what we ask our outside counsel to do is actively manage the spend. And we're never going to have an estimate that we're getting from outside counsel, rarely where it's a cap. Maybe sometimes it's a cap of indication. But we certainly don't want to see it blown like orders of magnitude with no explanation and in a way that's surprising. We've been able to avoid that, but we work very hard to avoid it.
Fair. So we're talking about international arbitration. I can't avoid asking you about local counsel.
Sure.
So what's your role in managing the relationship between international arbitration counsel and local counsel?
Right. We want local counsel to be more than just a name in the pleading. They've got to be an integral part of the team. We have a roster of capable firms where we operate, luckily for us. Our external counsel have their own rosters that we'll compare as to who's the best fit for a particular case. But we want that person to be, a no-drama part of the team, adding value on a substantive issue. We want them to make an appearance. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Oftentimes when you're in an arbitration, you're going to have an issue of local law, whatever it may be. Even if it's a treaty arbitration, you're probably going to have a local law issue. And you just have all the more street cred if you have your local counsel who's been a member of the team the whole way through, during the weekly calls, right, or the periodic update calls, and then when they make an appearance at the hearing. And not someone you're throwing in at the end just because you want to make it look like you actually value the input of the local attorneys.
Actual input.
Right, actual input.
So AES for 20 years now.
Yep.
How has the global disputes landscape changed over that time?
Sure. So geographically it's changed because our focus was far more, when I joined AES, Asia, Europe, we had a lot more projects in Asia and Europe. Now we have far fewer. Our focus is much more North America and Latin America. And the venue has changed from, let's say, having an arbitration cited in London to somewhere maybe in North America. That's one thing. From a technology standpoint, there's been a change because we used to be heavily thermal when I joined. And now we're a renewable company. So the technology's changed. That leads to a change of maybe some experts on the regulatory side or the technology side. During that time of change, our outside counsel had to shift from being experts in thermal facilities and, utilities maybe, to being expert in renewable facilities, wind, solar, battery, and so forth. And there's also now a lot of talk, and there has been for maybe quite some time now, about the pushback against treaty arbitration as a mechanism to solve disputes. So that's a change that we're following closely as an investor. We've had a handful or more of treaty cases, and something that we're going to pay close attention to.
Yeah, maybe we can touch on that in a few minutes.
Sure.
So let's talk about your presence in some of these countries. So I want to talk about the approach you take in relating to the host countries in, investment arbitration speak. Because when you make one of these investments, they're hopefully going to outlast several administrations, which can have different priorities and policies when it comes to energy generation.
Right.
So how do you approach the relationship with the host country knowing that?
We have a very proactive stakeholder management where we try to educate and keep in constant contact with not only our counterparties, but with the regulator itself. So that the first time they learn of AES, it's not because there's a problem. We've been there early, often. We try to be helpful in being participants of maybe some organizations that promote a very efficient and fair electricity grid and things like this. So we try to ensure that people know us or know of us as they're entering power, because it is a challenge. One of the things that we face frequently is when we come into a developing market or we come into a new market, the government changes, as you say, and the people who come into power don't necessarily know the deal. They don't know the agreement. They don't know what the parties have talked about and resolved before. And so part of our proactive management is just educating them in that history, so that if there ever does become an issue for whatever reason, they have some context before they reach a knee-jerk conclusion. Sometimes that's not always possible.
What's been the most challenging jurisdiction you've ever had to deal with?
That's a hard question.
That's not good.
Kazakhstan certainly is up there. And, it's kind of a good example, I guess, of those types of challenges. The biggest issue was we were investing in Kazakhstan when it was just leaving. It had just left the Soviet Union. They were trying to attract foreign investment. They got it, but they weren't really sure how to have a rule of law market. Okay, you privatized a company, oil majors came in, power companies came in, we came in. We took over certain assets, we owned them outright, or we had them under concession. We had 2 hydros under concession.
This is in the early 90s.
This was in the late 90s, 97 or so. And we invested a lot of money, a lot of time. We had hundreds of employees around the company. And it's very important in Kazakhstan to get it right, because the winters are so harsh. Those plants were, some of them were combined heat and power plants. If you didn't run the power plant correctly, people would have, it could be a serious concern for people. And so they had sour grapes about the deal. They first tried to invalidate the entire document, the entire investment agreement. That didn't work. They went back to the drawing board, that then tried to invalidate the arbitration provision. That ultimately led to some litigation in Kazakhstan and also in the United Kingdom. We had several competition litigations in the Kazakhstan, and afterwards we had 2 arbitrations, one treaty case and another case where we were just trying to get the price that they owed us to return the assets we had in possession to them. They really did not understand their obligations as a country that was going to be privatizing their markets and having to accord, let's say, the rule of law and fair play to an American investor like us.
Yeah. So these disputes against Kazakhstan are a great example. Are there any takeaways that you got from that experience?
Yeah. So we should have Kazakhstan and experiences like that. We've had experiences in other parts of the world. They were part of, not specifically, but the general sense of what went wrong maybe in Kazakhstan. They were part of this feeling that we needed to do stakeholder management, even more proactive, even though we had been very proactive. And We need to be much more careful and choosy about the markets that we pick to go into. That was a big part of it. Previously, let's say with AES was a growing company, they would go into markets without really maybe the most sophisticated understanding of what it would entail. We're much more sophisticated and focused on that now. And we think if you're going to go into a market, if you're not going to have a real presence as you're not going to be a significant presence in the market, and if the regulator doesn't know you, maybe you shouldn't be there.
One of the things you look at when you're considering a market, I assume, is investment protection.
Absolutely.
So taking a step back and maybe bottom line, in your experience, have you found investment treaty protection to be an effective tool in protecting investors?
Absolutely. No doubt about that. How do we know that? Well, because the states that we deal with, they take it seriously. And they know that when you do certain things, it's a non-free option for them. If you're a power company and you have previously a huge CCGT gas plant, or now let's say a huge solar farm or wind facility, that's steel in the ground. So if you're in power can be politicized. Even here in the United States, it can be politicized. So we're paying too much for power. People say that a lot, let's say, but when you're upgrading the grid and it can cost a fair bit of money. And so investors just want a rule of law environment. They want to know that the system's not going to change dramatically.
Yeah.
That sounds easy, but it's very hard in practice. And if something goes wrong, they want to know that they're going to have a fair hearing by a neutral authority. That's fundamental. So we found it's been helpful. It's hard. It's one of the hardest things you have to do. One of the problems we have, and sorry to ramble here, Roy, but we try to work it out. We take a long time doing that. Mm-hmm. That can be used against us by sovereigns. They can say, well, and they make the argument often, well, AES was here for so long, they must have somehow implicitly accepted the abuse, which is not correct. And smart tribunals understand that that's a weak argument on there, but they'll raise that. So that's one concern that we have, is that when we do try to work it out for so long, it's not just months, it may be years.
You're talking about avoiding litigation.
Avoiding arbitration and pulling the trigger, sending the trigger letter, and then starting a proceeding. And the reason we take a long time, when you get finally to a proceeding, we know as an investor that the sovereign is given a fair bit of deference. Even with respect to egregious conduct. So you've got to be very cautious about it. And then if you win, the sovereign states may not pay. There's I think someone keeps track of all the states that are the bad actors and either have disavowed their treaty obligations or they just don't pay upwards. And then if you win and you get a damages award and they don't pay, it takes a long time to convince a court to enforce. So it's not a perfect remedy, but it's a lot better than nothing.
Okay. So I think I have your thoughts on standards of protection and enforcement. Can I get your thoughts on selection process?
Sure. I think this is something that's fundamental to making an investor like AES comfortable with the process itself. Well, how do you ensure that you're going to get a fair hearing? Having a stake in the selection process is so important. You really feel as if you're going to have your voice at least heard on the tribunal in the spirit in which it's intended. That has been really one of the attractive features of treaty arbitration. On the other hand, because it's such a specialized field and the best of the best practice it, you do see a fair bit of overlap between cases. After a while, I've been doing it for a number of years now. A lot of the names are very familiar. And that makes a lot of sense on the one hand, because you're comfortable with what you're familiar with, and certainly you don't want to take a chance on an unknown. But on the other hand, perhaps there need to be additional voices on tribunals who can develop their own reputation. So I don't know how that's going to work out. That's always hard, and I know that's debated a lot, but it is a common issue.
Familiar is good, over familiar is bad.
Correct. Yeah.
So while we're in this rapid fire, that's selection. What about cost and time?
Cost and time. So we've covered some of the time aspect. The time in treaty arbitrations, something we usually don't pull the trigger, like I said, unless it's really an existential problem. Mm-hmm. unless it's an existential problem, we're not going to do it. Or we will be very hesitant to do it. We may do it. Because it takes so much time. In an exit proceeding, if you prevail, it's a guaranteed annulment proceeding, which is another 18 to 24 months, maybe 36. And then a lot of the time, even with Western nations like Spain, look at Spain now, they don't want to pay treaty awards that, where the investors prevail, and you've got to spend then months or years later. And some of that is due to the unfamiliarity with some court systems, really, even sophisticated ones, with how treaty arbitration ought to work. So it can take quite a bit of time, and obviously the costs are large, but when you're talking about an existential problem, it's not as much as a concern as, let's say, a standard construction dispute, where we've got pretty good estimates of how much certain disputes are going to cost, and we can gauge how we're doing against those past precedent. Treaty arbitration, you worry about it, you keep to your budget, but you're not as worried about given the losses that you're dealing with.
Okay, so we're talking about budgets, we're talking about time. I can't avoid asking you about discovery then.
Yeah. Discovery we are so accustomed in the United States, let me put it this way, to being absolutely transparent. It's just the sandbox we grow in. It's one of the reasons why I think our system is good in that respect. I know U.S.-style discovery gets a bad rap. It really shouldn't. We have very sophisticated tools to find, process, review, produce documents. The tools that were available in 2005 are so far behind what are available now. So it's not a problem to do electronic discovery. Now, why am I saying this? I know AES is doing it. I don't know when you've got a cash-strapped sovereign or even a counterparty who may not be based in the United States, who grows up in a different sandbox of transparency, if they're doing the same thing, if they're using the same effort to find information as we are. But look, we're going to do a robust search for information, but as opposed to maybe someone else who's not going to be doing something as robust.
It's got to go both ways.
Correct.
So if there's anything you would change now about the way that this investment arbitration framework works, what would you change?
The biggest thing I would change, yes, that's a really great question. Really, education of the courts as far as annulment challenges and enforcement challenges are concerned.
Right.
These are very interesting disputes. I think judges are naturally drawn to them. You've got legal, you've got social, economic, foreign relations. You've got it all in the case. So they're very interesting. They don't see them all the time, I don't think. They're seeing them more and more. So I think we, as the International Arbitration Bar, ought to spend some time. I know a lot of people are doing it, but something we could continue to do more of, to educate the judges who are actually presiding over enforcement cases, so that they can be taught kind of the high level, how it's supposed to work, as opposed to how it's working now. And maybe my unfair opinion, you're getting litigation part two of the case on the merits, because these issues are important. So despite what the statutes might say, or despite what the relevant rules might say about a review concerning bias or bribery or what have you, there is a tendency to want to get into the merits, which may lead to the delay. And I've got a couple of cases, in my mind about that as we're talking about it, but I'm sure you hear that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, interesting. So do you see AES or investors in general as having any role in that education need?
I think we need to do a much better job of it. I'm guilty as anyone else, and it's just a matter of time. You're so busy as external counsel or internal counsel, and you've got this great list of things you ought to be doing. But no, this is something that I think the investor side of the equation ought to be doing more of.
True. So we've gone through the good, the bad, the ugly of arbitration here. As Chief Counsel in Global Dispute Resolution, how do you go about maximizing the benefits and minimizing the faults of arbitration?
Education of your internal colleagues. As soon as, I'm joking around, but when we file a case, their interpretation of the risks and rewards is much different than litigators. So if I could just tell you a quick joke, the way that, let's say, a litigator might look at a sunny day. They might look at the one small black cloud in the corner and say, oh my gosh, it looks like we're going to get downpoured. Whereas a commercial person who's a business developer might say, on a very, very rainy day, and if there's one ray of sunshine, looks like we're going to have a sunny day. There's just a different perception. So you've got to be very careful about how you educate your internal people about the time and the risks, including on the risk that you might have to pay the other side's fees.
Sure.
This is not another criticism, but what I think is part on investors' minds. If an investor wins the case, oftentimes the sovereign doesn't have to pay the full weight or the full extent of the attorney's fees. But if the investor loses the case, they probably do have to pay. So this is a risk you've got to educate them on. And what we found is with our constant updates and, just water cooler talk, our management's been receptive to patience. So really, you just got to educate people to be patient.
Fair. So a few minutes ago, you hinted at the backlash that there's been against arbitration, investment arbitration in particular. We've seen states terminating some of their treaties, states excluding ISDS from their investment provisions, from their investment treaties. Australia several years ago said they were going to exclude ISDS from treaties going forward. The USMCA more recently has excluded Canada from ISDS. So as an investor, how do you see this trend? How do you feel about it?
Obviously as an investor, it's something that we view with caution. As a practitioner, obviously, it's a very interesting time because there is change. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, you've got to ask the question, are the countries that are having a little bit of the backlash getting the foreign direct investment that they need? If it means anything, I can tell you with certainty that we absolutely, as part of evaluating a market or a project, think about international treaties. Absolutely. And those markets where we don't have an international treaty, or we may have one, but we can't enforce because they don't have assets in a jurisdiction that we could attach if we win, we're very, very hesitant to do business with people like that. So, it's an issue. Obviously, there's a debate on what standards should apply, whether fair and equitable treatment is too broad and ambiguous, how should you select a tribunal. I think that those are all fair topics and we ought to debate them. But fundamentally, what you really need is you've got to ask yourself the question, be guided by the question, is this going to attract or maybe deter foreign investment? And you've got to also ask the question, is this going to lead to a level playing field on the rule of law between sovereign and investor? A lot of different ways to accomplish that. And maybe we can get there. We'll see where the pendulum swings. Work with that and maybe have some debates later down the road. Yeah.
So we are at Arbitral Voices, but you're here. I have to ask you, what other areas of law are you paying attention to mostly?
So right now, we're paying close attention to greenhouse gas litigation in the United States because there are a lot of very well-funded and smart plaintiffs groups who are trying to utilize the theories of liability, tort theories of liability at the state level against industries that have emitted CO2 into the atmosphere. There's a big battle as to whether or not those are going to be in the federal courts or the state courts. We'll see where that shakes out. That's something obviously we're paying attention to because the potential for, the tobacco-type litigation is there for any company because almost everybody emits CO2, so you can't escape the issue. So that's something we're paying close attention to for sure.
Sustainability is more than a buzzword, and I think there's been a lot of attention paid to it in the corporate and regulatory sphere, but there's also a big, disputes side to it.
Yep.
You've had activists using litigation to push sustainability governments. You've had the government using litigation to try to force companies into more sustainable practices. You've had internal stakeholders, you litigating about how far to take sustainability. What's your feeling on this focus on sustainability, especially from the dispute space?
Yeah, I think it's a very good focus. It's core to what we do. It's something we take incredibly serious. We really think about sustainability, ESG, doing the right thing, and how we approach our business, just writ large. We've got a lot of of accolades for that. We've gotten some good awards about being one of the world's most ethical companies for, I think it's 11 years in a row now, which is quite a feat. Obviously, we have a robust compliance department to make sure that everything's on the up and up with respect to your transactions. That's absolutely necessary. We've got that. We do things that we aren't required to do. For example, and this, obviously there are a lot more examples, but we were the first publicly traded U.S. utility to do a climate scenarios report, essentially demonstrating to the street, look, we have a resilient portfolio, a resilient company, depending on various climate change scenarios. Mm-hmm. And we also had a market-leading greenhouse gas disclosures for a long time. So these are just all examples. Why am I saying that? It kind of just is really kind of embedded into what we do on the dispute side. We try to litigate our cases or our arbitrations the right way. Mm-hmm. We try to have the right external counsel. We want to make sure the case is presented in the right way. We want to maintain our credibility. We want to present information the right way. We don't want anything to be misconstrued in a way where someone gets the feeling that we're being less than forthcoming on discovery, or someone gets the feeling that we're gaming the evidence. Everything has got to be the up and up, and not because we should do it, because it is the right thing to do. And ultimately, I think that plays to our benefit when we're litigating our cases.
So last question, I don't know if it's a buzzword, but big topic is AI.
Yeah.
So how are you thinking about AI and its role in arbitration or the dispute sphere?
It has a tremendous promise. It has a long way to go. Mm-hmm. And we as a company, I think every company has an AI strategy. You've got to. There's a concern if you don't, the other person will, and then you're going to have a competitive disadvantage. So you've got to test it out. So we have a mandate at every group within the company at AES worldwide to try to utilize AI as much as you can, but and develop new areas and efficiencies. Great. Is it ready for prime time in arbitration? I think outside counsel is a better sense of that. Obviously, there's the example recently of someone who used AI to do some research, submitted a filing to a court in the United States, and hallucinations are real. You'll punch in a prompt to the whatever it might be, Copilot or Gemini or whatever, and it will give you what you asked for. So if you ask for X, Y, and Z, it will give you X, Y, and Z. That doesn't mean X, Y, and Z is actually there and is correct in the context of the case. So right now, we're not finding efficiencies with it because it's so new that you really have to test it in parallel the old-fashioned way, not using AI, and then you find gaps and you do a gaps analysis and you try to make it better. But I do know that outside counsel, they're using the program to try to develop algorithms so that they can be more efficient in doing their job, and I'm all for that.
Scary and exciting.
Yeah, scary and exciting.
Okay, with that, Marc, thank you so much for stopping by. It was great having you here.
Thanks for having me, Roy. And kudos to you and the ITA, by the way, for doing this.
Oh, thanks so much. It's a great project. Okay. And thank you for watching.